something, that's when you'll be live. So give it a second. Okay. Just know. You're connected. Tell him he's live.
You're live, Ibrahim.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ibrahim Hooper. I'm National Communications Director with the Council on American Islamic Relations. And today is, you're watching today's Daily Dose with CARE, community conversations with CARE representatives around the country, with national and local Muslim activists and leaders and religious figures, sometimes even a comedian or two. Today, we're taking a look at an update on the protests that are going on nationwide in response to the murder of George Floyd. We're going to go to our New York representatives. We're going to go to Los Angeles and Minnesota, where we have CARE representatives on the ground monitoring what's happening in the situation, and particularly in Minnesota. On a side note, I happen to be from the neighborhood where this started in South Minneapolis. And so I'm quite familiar with that setting, with the community there. But they've been taking place in other places, Atlanta, Chicago, everywhere. In fact, there's one occurring last night in Washington, D.C., and here in Virginia just today. But first, try and bring in Ahmed Mohammed. He's our attorney at our New York office, to try and get an update on the situation there, what's happening on the ground in terms of the community's response to this murder. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum. You're on mute.
Thank you. We always have tech issues every once in a while. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. Just to kind of answer your question, here in New York City, we have seen a tremendous grassroots movement over the last several days, rallying, protesting for justice for Mr. George Floyd, and for other, African-American community members who have been affected by police brutality. That has been extremely heartening for us to see, our brothers and sisters from the African-American community, from other minority groups come out to the streets. But it's at the exact same time that that's happening, we have seen, the way that the NYPD has reinforced their past negative practices of using, police brutality to inflict pain and damage, and really abuse.
Describe some of those incidents. I saw one of the early ones. I think it was a Muslim woman who was knocked down by the police officer in the initial stages.
Absolutely. We have seen videos upon videos of police officers, some of them high-ranking officials like sergeants, who have approached protesters who are engaging in their First Amendment right, and assaulting them in some instances, whether that is, pushing them into the ground, where this young woman was actually pushed, hit her head on the concrete slab and had to get sent to the emergency room, whether it's seeing two police vehicles run through crowds of protesters as they were protesting in the streets. Just a huge disregard for human life that the NYPD continues to show. We welcomed the Attorney General's office here issuing a statement saying that they were opening up an investigation into the NYPD's use of force in response to the protesters. But one thing I want to say, and it's really important, is that we need to look at the way the NYPD and other law enforcement agencies respond to begin with at the very beginning to these types of protests. When we see protesters who are protesting about the Second Amendment, and they happen to be white nationalist groups, we see law enforcement really take a hands-off approach. Where when it is a minority community advocating for their civil rights, like in this situation, we see a police force that is out there that is meant to intimidate and brutalize our communities. There's a photo of, officers, over 100 police officers lined up in front of the Barclays Center here in Brooklyn, at least an hour before the protest actually started. And that sends a message to these protesters, to our community members, that the police is there to intimidate them and to really restrict the way they're protesting. And it causes an antagonizing feeling that sometimes leads to these moments of non-violence that we've seen in some of the videos.
Yeah. While we're talking, let's bring in Fayaz Nawabi, our CARE LA's policy and advocacy manager. He can also give a perspective. And I think from both of you, there's so much criticism from the right about the limited acts of violence we've seen from a minority of people taking part in these protests. How are you responding, Brother Fayaz, to that kind of criticism?
So I want to start off by sending our condolences to the Floyd family and wanting to remind the community, to stay safe. We want to exercise our First Amendment right, but also to stay safe. As far as what's happening here right now in Los Angeles, we are seeing large sums of people that are protesting peacefully. The key is protesting peacefully. And we have had incidents where some community members from the Muslim community were arrested during the protests here in Los Angeles. Luckily, we have many good allies within the LAPD. Some of them are sergeants, and we're able to contact them immediately, making sure that those individuals that were arrested were taken care of, were released in a timely manner. And this is why it's important that we have organizations like CARE on the ground with the relationships that we have to get our communities out of harm's way as soon as possible. I would also recommend the community to really pay attention in the next coming days. From our office, especially, we're going to be releasing a great deal of infographics and information for the community to know their rights as protesters, because that is something that many of our community members do not understand. They're entering into this realm of activism. They're entering into this realm of protesting, but they don't know their rights. So what we are doing with our civil rights team is creating infographics for the community, so that way they are well prepared in understanding their own rights. The other thing I would also say is 99% of the protesters are peaceful protesters. There are some individuals that come with malicious intent. They are not really a part of the protest. They're coming there for looting, for doing other bad acts. We recommend to the community, please stay away from these individuals. Come in, exercise your First Amendment right. But again, make sure that you are safe. Make sure that you are safe within your own privy, inshallah.
And just a note to our producer, we're working to get Brother Jailani Hussein who's on the ground actually at a rally today in Minnesota, CARE Minnesota. Once he's online, just bring him in straight away when he gets there. So to both of you, how does the Muslim community factor in all of these protests? Have they been a major factor, a minor factor? What's the role of the local Muslim communities in these protests?
So I'll go first. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go first. So from here in New York and a local Muslim community, one of the biggest things that we wanted to do was to make sure that our community was putting out public statements of solidarity along with the Black Lives Matter movement, and also sending condolences and statements of support to the Lloyd family as well, and making sure that we're putting pressure on public officials to seek justice in these situations. So CARE New York, for example, has published a solidarity statement on our front page. We've issued solidarity statements with other Muslim organizations as well. There are Muslim individuals and organizations that are participating in these rallies and these protests to make sure that we're showing support as we as a community in conjunction with our African American brothers and sisters are fighting and asking for justice as well.
Brother Fayaz?
So from KRLA's side, what we have been doing is really working to communicate with our community leaders from the African American community, including organizations like Isla LA, Ilm Foundation, Muslim Arc. They do wonderful, wonderful work, and they've been doing this great work of really deconstructing the anti-Black sentiments within not only the the broader community, but also within the Muslim community. So one of the great programs that Isla LA, Ilm Foundation, and other wonderful organizations are actually working on is this coming Friday, inshallah ta'ala, they created a list of demands from the Muslim community that this Friday, all of the masajid are recommended to talk about racism within the community, not just from the broader context, but also within the community. And then on July 5th, inshallah ta'ala, they're also going to have a caravan going out to really talk and uplift the voices of those community members that have historically been disenfranchised. So that is what we're doing right now with our community. In addition to that, one of the things that I just got off a call with my executive director, Hussam Eliush, and during our manager's call, we talked about how can we engage the immigrant Muslim community, because one of the challenges with the immigrant Muslim community is they don't really understand the historical context of how racism has affected the Black community in America for centuries. So what we are trying to do is really educate the immigrant community, bring them to understand what these struggles mean to the Black community, and understand how we can, as a community, as immigrants, can help the Black community. So one of the things we are doing is we're going to be working to organize things like drive-through protests, right? Where we go, because of COVID-19, it makes things very difficult. We want to really look at COVID-19, make sure that we have the social distancing that's needed right now. We don't want an uptick in COVID-19 cases again. We're having folks do drive-through protests by the masajid, inshallah ta'ala. In addition to that, we're also creating infographics for masajid to connect with their local print companies to create banners, whether the banners say Black Lives Matter, the banners might say things like we stand in solidarity with the Floyd family. These are the kinds of things that our community needs to get more used to, and that's what we're trying to engage the community, get them more active. And finally, one of the things that we are doing here at KRLA is we're really building our targeted action campaigns. Every single Wednesday, we have our targeted action. We engage the community on municipal, state, and federal legislation to get them to sign petitions, to call their legislators, to email their legislators. So we are creating a targeted action campaign about the specific issues on those police departments that have a history of police brutality, and really hold them accountable and have the community members to call those police departments and let them know, hey, what you have done in the past was wrong, and we want to see change. So that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, the calls from the right to open up the society during the pandemic and promote beach parties and pool parties and this kind of thing. But then when people march, somehow that's something they want to shut down right away. But how are the protesters on the ground handling the whole social distancing problem during the pandemic? Brother Ahmed?
Yeah, let me just add one thing here for programming purposes. Later on this week, Care New York is going to launch a 3 to 5 episode webinar series that's going to focus on educating the community regarding police brutality, anti-Black racism from government institutions. And so we're going to really look forward to that and have some really good speakers. In terms of maintaining social distance, there are a lot of ways to do so. You can either remain 6 feet apart, or you can wear a mask while you're protesting. All of the, the protests that we have seen, there's been a general good sense of, compliance with social distancing rules. The overwhelming majority of videos and individuals that I have seen protesting have worn proper regulation masks, during the protest to follow social distancing rules. I do want to say one thing, as we started this broadcast, the governor announced that they are going to institute a curfew for New York City. So they're right now, I think starting tonight, there's going to be a curfew for all individuals starting at 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. So for anybody watching in New York City, they should know that there's going to be a curfew starting tonight.
Have either of you seen evidence of these statements that there have been white supremacists, or right-wing extremists, agent provocateurs in the crowds promoting the kind of violence and arson we've seen? Brother Fayaz?
There have been a lot of comments saying things like, let's wear like Antifa gear and then go into these protests, right? And then what we're also seeing, at least, I mean, you see that at the national level. I'm on TikTok. I don't know if you guys use TikTok, and for some reason on TikTok, I get a lot of like white nationalist group messages. I don't know why the algorithm worked like that, but I'm seeing videos. Literally this morning, I'm seeing videos, people saying, hey, a guy on a truck, he's literally driving his truck saying, I can't wait to drive through these protest crowds, right? And these are like, and these videos are getting hundreds of thousands of views. And so I'm not shocked when I see what happened in Seattle. I think it was Seattle, right? Where the semi truck broke through the police barricade and started going through the protest crowds. So these things are really happening because they feel like, why are these protesters, because I'm now watching these videos, why are these protesters, blocking the road? I got to get to work, right? So really, there are a lot of nasty things happening, and we want to really make sure that as a community, we're aware of this. The internet is a very interesting place, and people post a lot of interesting things. Just yesterday, I saw a video of someone, having an assault rifle on TikTok, and he's just saying, you come near me, I'm going to shoot you. And he just started like shooting the ground or what have you, or not the ground, but like a piece of wood or what have you. So these are the kinds
Brother
of...
Ahmed, have you seen evidence? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Have you, in the New York protests, seen any evidence of agent provocateurs and, white supremacist extremists, that kind of thing?
Similar to what Brother Fayaz mentioned, we've seen the comments and allegations online, but we haven't seen any, any solid evidence to support those allegations.
Because I know for quite some time, the white supremacists have been trying to use the ongoing pandemic as a spark for their race war that they're seeking. So, this is an opportunity for them if they're trying to be agents provocateurs in these kinds of situations. It's prime territory.
So one of the things I would also add was I had a conversation with one of our staffers this morning, actually, and she attended the protest in Long Beach, which is next to Los Angeles. And she was saying the protest was very peaceful. There was no issues until basically right at the end of the protest, some kids that were Caucasian just started throwing eggs at the police. They just started throwing eggs at them and throwing stuff at them. So we don't know, they're all wearing face masks and things covering their face. We don't know who they're associated with, but one of our staffers saw it live, just watching them throwing these eggs and what have you. And eventually that protest escalated where the police officers in riot gear started shooting riot pellets at people. One of my good friend, Dan Gallagher, he's a well-known activist in the Southern California area. He was shot by one of those pellets. And again, we don't know who these people are because they put on masks and you don't know who they are, whether they're these people or that people. So we just cannot assume things. However, that is what one instance where one of our staffers here in KRLA witnessed herself.
Okay. To both of you, what are we seeing going forward tonight and for subsequent nights in terms of protests and rallies? First of all, Brother Ahmed.
Yeah, so groups throughout the city and throughout the state really are continuing to protest. And like Brother Fayaz said, and we've mentioned here, all of these protests are overwhelmingly peaceful. There's normally something that happens during the event that may cause things to escalate. So that's really, really important. I think what these groups are asking for, what we're asking for, is a recognition, number one, that there's always been over-policing of communities of color, and it's not accidental. It has been happening for hundreds of years, whether it's the NYPD or ICE, and it's a part of a system of repression that goes back a very, very long time, and a lot of it is designed to intimidate and to inflict brutality and cruelty without any accountability, which is really important. And I will say this, something that groups here in New York State have been working on is to repeal a specific piece of legislation that's called 50A, which protects abusive police officers from having their records released, right? So that the community members don't know which police officers have a track record of committing, use of force violations and really abusing community members by abusing their power as a police officer. There is legislation to repeal that act. And we're going to continue to advocate that there is more accountability, there's more transparency. And I think one of the saddest things that we've seen here is that our Mayor de Blasio, has really just, disregarded the protesters and what they're going through, and has not done a very good job in standing up for human life, in calling out the NYPD for their transgressions. And that's very sad. And I think that what you're going to see moving forward is a real push from community organizations, from communities of color, pressuring the city council to slash funding for the NYPD, which has an incredible amount of funding in the budget, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, instead of cutting critical funding for human services and education moving forward.
All right. As we're talking here, I'm trying to connect with Brother Jailani, because he's on the ground at an actual protest going on right now. It's a little difficult to reach him in Minnesota. But Brother Fayaz, go ahead with what we can look forward to in the LA community in terms of response to this ongoing situation.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Brother Ibrahim. So I talked a little bit about some of the programs that we're organizing in the next coming weeks, with the drive-through protests, with helping mosques really develop their signs of solidarity, with working with the leaders in the Black Muslim community, inshallah ta'ala. And then finally, one of the things that we've been working on and we're continuing to work on is with legislation, right? As Brother Ahmed was saying, we want to make sure that we have legislation that not only passes, but is also being implemented. In the state of California, last year, we were blessed to pass a piece of legislation called AB 392, which is the police use of force bill. It really adds a great deal of parameters around this concept of police use of force. And what we are finding right now is many police departments are not implementing the recommendations and the rules that AB 392 is putting in place. So one of these, I cannot mention the police departments at this moment because we're working to get them to change their policies and to meet with the coalition. But here in the Orange County area, in the LA area, our good partners at ACLU and other partners in this in the coalition are setting up meetings with police departments, with the police chief, with individuals that are high ranking in the various police departments all throughout the Southern California and the California region to make sure that they update their best practices when apprehending someone, when questioning individuals also. So that's what we're working on right now. And inshallah ta'ala, in the next month, we're looking forward to, if we don't get good responses from these police departments, we're looking forward to create targeted actions where the community emails those police departments, where the community starts calling these police departments, demanding that they change their practices and make sure they do not use excessive force.
To both of you, do you think this is really going to be a watershed moment? I mean, people, each time something like this happens, people say, oh, this is it. Finally, people will wake up to white supremacy, to racism, to systemic racism and discrimination, that this is it. This is the time. We've heard it time and time in the past. Do either of you or both of you think that this is a real watershed moment, or are we still going to be in the same place a year from now? Brother Ahmed?
Look, I mean, the fight for justice it's a long-term fight that obviously has been happening for decades, and inshallah we make incremental progress. I do think that positive change will happen in response to some of these protests. Will these communities receive wholesale change that they need? I don't think so. I think it's going to be an incremental change process. But unlike previous protests, we are seeing more political officials release statements that are more understanding to these protests, that are more critical with the police misconduct issues. Our governor, for example, yesterday called for a standardized police misconduct policies across America, right? He's never called for that in the past. He's also called for disciplinary records of police officers accused of misconduct to be released, which is the 50A repeal policy we talked about earlier. He's called for the federal government to create one definition for excessive force. Where in these instances in the past, these politicians have mostly stayed silent or sided with the police union and the police department, instead of the protesters, instead of fighting for human rights and civil rights. So we are seeing some incremental changes. Do we believe that these changes go far enough, or that they're being changed at a pace that we are satisfied with? Absolutely not.
Brother Fayaz, watershed moment or business as usual? What do you think?
I honestly do not know what's going to happen in the next year. There's a lot of distractions in our society. There's a saying that the Romans used to use, Cersus et Barnum, right? Give them their bread and their entertainment, and you as a
bread and
entity,
circuses. Yep.
Yeah, we're the most well-fed, well-entertained country in the entire world. So what we need to do as a community is just become more cognizant of this reality, and really start to listen and start to understand the struggles of others.
All right. Unfortunately, it looks like we're not able to bring in Brother Jelani Hussein from Minnesota, but hopefully we'll get an update on the ongoing rally that's occurring right now. We're hearing from other CARE chapters that there's ongoing rallies. I think there's one in the San Francisco Bay Area going on right now, or our representatives are at that. So we'll get hopefully some follow-up from them perhaps tomorrow on our next program. Thank you both for being on today, and thanks for the work that you do in your local communities. And people should just monitor our website for our ongoing activities. If you want to get our daily emails, go to the cair.com and put in your email address so that you get the updates on a daily basis. Do you both want to give a plug for your various updates?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much to CARE for hosting me today and letting me speak about what's happening here in New York City. For anyone in the state of New York to sign up for our newsletter or need additional information like a Know Your Rights guide, please go to our webpage, cair-ny.org. And please, if you're protesting, we encourage you to protest. Stay safe. social distance, wear a mask, and make sure that, you know, that you're remaining peaceful, and that you're not getting into a situation that can cause you to get arrested.
All right, Brother Fayaz, final words.
So from KRLA's side, again, we're going to be releasing those infographics on your rights as a protester by the end of the day. Inshallah ta'ala, you could go to carela.org to look at the infographics. You could also check us out on our social media, inshallah ta'ala.
All right. Well, again, thank you both for being on, and everyone who's watching can stay tuned tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern Time for the next Daily Dose on subjects of relevance to the American Muslim community and to the larger society.